Once upon a time, in a small village where the sun shone brightly and rivers flowed gently, there lived a man named Keen. Everyone called him Mr. Keen. Mr. Keen was very poor, so poor that his pockets were always empty. While other men wore fine clothes and spoke in big words, Mr. Keen had no fancy words to share. He couldn't read or write. In fact, he was the only man in the village who had never been to school. Because of this, people looked down on him. Mr. Keen had a big family, almost like a garden full of flowers. He had 4 wives, each more stubborn than the other, and 12 daughters, all as beautiful as moonlight. But despite his large family, Mr. Keen was lonely. The villagers laughed at him whenever he walked by. "Look at Mr. Keen," they would say, shaking their heads. "The man doesn't even know how to read. How foolish he must feel." Mr. Keen never replied. He kept his head down, his heart heavy like a stone sinking in water. Their laughter followed him everywhere, like shadows on a sunny day. But Mr. Keen had a secret. He was actually the richest man in the village, a billionaire. Nobody knew, not even his wives or daughters. There was more to his wealth than anyone could guess. Mr. Keen's story was just beginning, and soon, everyone would learn not to judge a book by its cover. A poor man today might be the one to help you tomorrow. When Mr. Keen turned 60, trouble knocked on his door. He fell very sick. One morning, he woke up and couldn't move his hands. They felt as heavy as stones. His legs were stiff, like dry sticks. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't listen. His family panicked. They carried him to healers, hoping for a cure. The healers rubbed herbs on him, whispered prayers, and gave him bitter roots to chew. But nothing worked. Days turned into weeks, and Mr. Keen only grew weaker. His hands and legs refused to move, and his sickness worsened. The family spent all their money, but Mr. Keen stayed sick. Slowly, his family lost hope. His wives began whispering to each other. "What a mistake we made marrying this man," they said. "We deserve better." Even his daughters, who were admired in the village for their beauty, stopped respecting him. When Mr. Keen tried to guide them, they rolled their eyes. "Why should we listen to you?" they sneered. "You don't even know how to read. Go to school first before you tell us what to do." Their words hurt him deeply, but he stayed silent. He lay there, helpless, watching his family drift away. His heart felt as heavy as a rock. Things got worse. Mr. Keen couldn't control his body. He wet himself and soiled his clothes, but his daughters just laughed at him. They didn't help clean him or cook for him. Instead, they left him lying there in dirty clothes that smelled bad. It was the kind neighbors who felt sorry for him. Every day, they brought him a small bowl of food. They couldn't stay long because they had their own lives, but at least they showed kindness, something his family refused to do. To make matters worse, his daughters started bringing strange men home. The house was full of noise and laughter, with dancing and drinking. They acted as if their father didn't exist, treating him like a piece of furniture. Mr. Keen lay there, trapped, watching his family fall apart. Each moment shattered his heart into 1,000 tiny pieces. One bright afternoon, Mr. Keen's eldest daughter, proud and beautiful, walked into the house with a tall, rich man by her side. His name was Nicholas. He was handsome, with sharp eyes like an eagle, and wore clothes finer than anything the villagers had ever seen. She held her head high, thinking she had found the perfect man. But as soon as Nicholas stepped into the room and saw Mr. Keen lying there, weak and frail, he stopped. His eyes widened, and without a second thought, he dropped to his knees, bowing so low that his forehead touched the ground. "Ah, Baba," he said, greeting him with deep respect. "It is an honor to be in your presence." Mr. Keen's daughters gasped, their mouths open in shock. They had never seen anyone show their father such respect, especially not a rich man like Nicholas. In their minds, their father was just a sick, old man. But here was Nicholas, bowing to him as if he were a king. The daughters stood frozen, confused and amazed. When Nicholas stood up, he noticed the stunned expressions on their faces. They stared at him with their mouths open, unable to understand why this wealthy, respected man was bowing to their father. He turned to them and said, "Do you not know? Your father, Baba Keen, is my boss. He owns the largest gold mine in this village." The words hit like thunder. The daughters' eyes grew even wider, and their hearts raced. They looked at each other, struggling to understand. "Our father," one of them stammered, disbelief in her voice. "But he's just a poor, sick man. How could he?" Kajiso smiled gently. "Your father may seem simple, but he is wiser than any of us know. Years ago, he took a 5-year leave from the mine and put me in charge. He trusted me to run the business while he stayed here, unseen and unheard." The daughters were left speechless. Their minds were spinning. The man they had mocked and ignored was the richest man in the village. Their father was not the fool they had thought him to be. Kajiso sat down, his voice calm and steady as he began to tell them a story they had never heard. "You see," he said, "the men in this village may be educated, but their wealth comes from something much deeper. Something buried beneath the ground." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Gold," he said. The daughters listened in wonder and disbelief. "This village," Nicholas continued, "is sitting on a treasure of gold. Many men became rich because of it, but few know that the largest gold mine, the richest land, belongs to none other than your father, Baba Keen." The daughters gasped, looking at each other in shock. How could this be? Their father, the man they thought was the poorest, was the owner of the greatest treasure in the land. Kajiso nodded, seeing their shock. "Your father kept it a secret," he said. "He only has daughters, and he knew that wealth could bring danger. People would try to use his riches and sway his daughters for their own gain. So he chose to live quietly, hiding his fortune to protect you." All the daughters' faces turned pale. They had treated their father with disrespect, not knowing the sacrifices he had made and the secrets he had kept to protect them. Kajiso looked at the daughters, his eyes filled with quiet sadness. "Your father," he began, his voice heavy, "had a plan. A plan he kept to himself. He wanted to know who would stay by his side when he had nothing. Who would care for him if times became hard. So he decided to pretend he was sick." The daughters listened, their hearts filling with shame. They looked down, remembering how they had treated their father, the man who had raised them, as if he were nothing. Your father thought, Kagiso continued, that perhaps in his weakest moment, his family would gather around him, support him, and show him love. But one by one, everyone he cared for turned away. The room was quiet, thick with regret. Kagiso's voice softened. Not even his wives stayed. They left him. And you, his daughters, you laughed at him. You mocked him while he lay there, hoping for a single hand to hold him, a single heart to care. The daughters felt their faces burn with shame. Every cruel word they had spoken came back to them like sharp arrows. They had laughed at their own father, thinking he was worthless. They never guessed that he was testing them, watching to see who would stand by him. But in his lowest moment, they had all failed him. The news of Mr. Ikeen's true wealth spread through the village like wildfire. The people who had once laughed at him, who had called him a fool and looked down on him, now stood frozen in shock. Their whispers filled the air, like dry leaves rustling. How could we have been so blind? The villagers murmured. Mr. Ikeen, the richest man among us, living like the poorest. Mr. Ikeen's daughters felt their hearts sink like stones in deep water. Every laugh, every harsh word they had thrown at him came rushing back. They remembered the times they had turned away, mocked him, and left him helpless and alone. His wives, too, felt the sharp sting of regret. They had walked away, thinking they deserved more, thinking Mr. Ikeen had nothing to offer. But now they saw the truth. They had lost everything, the life they could have lived, the comfort and joy they could have had. It had all slipped away because they had turned their backs on the one who loved them most. The entire village felt the weight of their shame, but none felt it as heavily as Mr. Ikeen's own family. They hadn't just lost wealth, they had lost the trust, the warmth, and the love of a father who had been willing to give them everything. Mr. Ikeen, seeing the sorrow and regret on the faces of his daughters and wives, sat quietly. His heart was heavy but clear. He had seen who truly cared for him in his darkest days, and he knew what to do with his wealth. Instead of giving his riches to the family who had abandoned him, Mr. Ikeen chose to honor those who had shown him kindness, those who had brought him food when he was sick and offered a hand when he was alone. One by one, Mr. Ikeen called upon the villagers who had helped him, the neighbors who brought him food every day. He gave them sacks of rice, bags of yams, and coins that sparkled like the morning sun. To the children who sang for him, he gave clothes, toys, and even a little gold. For every act of kindness, he returned it with gifts, blessing those who had blessed him. The village was filled with joy and gratitude. Their hearts were warmed by the kindness of the man they had once overlooked. And so, Mr. Ikeen's well of kindness spread across the village like rain, nourishing the hearts of those who had cared for him in his hardest times. In his final gathering with the villagers, Mr. Ikeen stood before them. His voice was quiet but full of wisdom. He looked at the faces around him, those who had helped him and those who had turned away. With a calm heart, he revealed the truth. Dear friends, he began, though I pretended to be sick at first, my faith has made it real. I have only 6 months left. A hush fell over the crowd. His daughters began to weep, their faces wet with tears of regret. They knelt before him, begging, Father, please forgive us. We were blind. We didn't see your kindness or your strength. Please forgive us. But Mystery Keen only smiled, a gentle, weary smile. "My daughters," he said softly, "you have shown me your hearts. I have seen who you truly are. My love for you remains, but trust must be earned, and respect must be given freely." With those words, Mystery Keen turned to those who had cared for him, who had stood by him without knowing his wealth. In the company of those who had shown him true kindness, Mystery Keen spent his last days in peace. When he passed, the village remembered him not as a poor, uneducated man, but as a wise, generous soul who taught them that kindness and respect are worth more than gold. His story remained in their hearts, like a guiding star, reminding them always to honor those who stand by them in times of need. I hope you enjoyed this tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.